Good morning and welcome to FOWL's First Thursday. That's Friends of the Waccamaw Library, our wonderful Friends organization. They make this series possible and so many other programs possible and events and so much. The Friends store, the Friends Center at the Waccamaw branch. So if you're not a member of FOWL, our Friends of the Waccamaw Library, please join up and give your time and talents as a volunteer to that organization. They help keep us strong. And this is First Thursday, a wonderful series that was really started by Jill Santrapetro, and she got it going, and I've just kind of kept the momentum going. Thanks to Jill, she handed it off to me. And usually Jill's husband, Tom Santrapetro, helps us out with some piano music if we're in person. So we're looking forward to starting back in the fall with some in-person programming again and having some in-person live performances with Tom Santrapetro to get us going. But so we got that coming up, and that'll be in September. Right now, this will be our final for the series for this year, and we're closing with a bang, not a whimper. And it's today Amy Trice from the Ocean Conservancy up in Washington, D.C., joining us remotely. She's going to be talking with us about achieving a sustainable ocean economy for South Carolina. So something near and dear to our hearts here on the ocean here in Georgetown County. So Amy Trice is the Director of Ocean Planning at the Ocean Conservancy in Washington, D.C., and she will address this issue that's vital on the South Carolina coast, how best to address pollution, sea level rise, and coastal flooding. Amy will explain how integrated ocean management, or IOM, offers a new adaptable approach to better balance the ocean economy with its diverse marine ecosystems, incorporating local, regional, and global elements. Trice has advocated for more comprehensive, coordinated ocean policies through 2 U.S. administrations. Now, I guess is working on her third. And Nature, National Geographic, Science, Bloomberg, and NPR have interviewed her or featured her work. So we're very pleased and honored to have Amy Trice with us today to talk with us about achieving a sustainable ocean economy here on the South Carolina coast. So welcome, Amy. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Can you, if we start off here, can you tell us a little bit about your background and maybe how you got involved in this field of ocean planning?
Sure. First, I'll start off by saying I live in Washington, D.C. and have for 10 years, but I'm a Georgian, and so, certainly appreciate the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, and that's sort of a near and dear, place to me. So, I love Pawleys Island and sort of love where you all are, so it's a great place. But, a little bit about sort of how I got involved in this. I'm a scientist by training. I'm an aquatic ecologist, actually. I went to the Odom School of Ecology and, just really fell in love with science. And, particularly at the Odom School, there's the big approach around systems thinking. So looking at, the whole of the environment and thinking about all the different elements, right? And it's not just looking at, so say trees, for example, it's thinking about the forest and the sort of components that make that up. And that just sort of view of the world and the way to sort of think about science, just, it really resonated with me. And, I went to graduate school there and studied headwater stream salamanders in North Carolina and the Appalachian Mountains and, did all this sort of nerdy science work and was sort of starting to feel like okay, I could go down this path and, do a lot of great science and publish papers and, contribute to a field, and that would be really great. But what I loved is, I grew up in a small town in Georgia, and I loved being able to sort of translate that and talk about science and, how does that impact what we need to do? And sort of, I sort of on a whim thought, maybe this is something I should try out. And I took a fellowship for 2 years at American Rivers, which is a phenomenal organization doing a lot of Clean Water Act and stormwater management work. So a lot of what they do is, they work with cities on, how do we address flooding, or how do we address stormwater management? How do we help? And it was just this really actionable sort of approach to taking science and information and like changing and making decisions. And it just really resonated with me. And after my fellowship, this job at Ocean Conservancy opened up, and it may seem like a switch to go from small streams to oceans, but that concept is really the same in terms of systems thinking. And particularly, I think, as we talk a little bit more about ocean planning or integrated ocean management, like the way you sort of view things holistically to try to make more informed decisions, those skills are the same, and that just really resonated with me. So I've been at Ocean Conservancy for about 8 years, and yeah, we've worked with various administrations, and we see ourselves as a pragmatic sort of solution-based organization, trying to make really informed decisions with people, with communities at the center of that, but also protecting wildlife.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I have to. We'll get into the oceans in depth, I hope, momentarily. But I do have to kind of backtrack a little bit into your past and what you said, which struck me as fascinating. I didn't know that you'd started out working on salamanders in Appalachian small streams, which is fascinating. And as you said, it connects, as small streams eventually connect to the ocean. Yep. It's sort of like your career, it has connected up to that vast ocean. But can you tell us a little bit about, why salamanders? Something, I love salamanders, and I love Appalachian small streams, where my people come from initially, and I kind of identify with Appalachia. But why salamanders? Why why were they important to study?
Yeah, so for folks that don't know, the Appalachian sort of Blue Ridge Mountain area, that area is the hotspot of diversity of salamanders for the entire world. Wow. The most species, the most diverse species. It's just the sort of hotspot epicenter of the world. So it is like one of the coolest places to study salamanders. And the interesting thing about them in headwater streams is there are no fish in headwater streams, so they are the apex predator. So they are the top person. They are the shark equivalent in the ocean. They're in small headwater streams. So you can learn a lot about the dynamics of the way the food web and the way that they feed and sort of what that system looks like by studying salamanders. And particularly sort of the thing that I was focused on or looking at was how do we do, if you start to think about low impact development, right? So a lot of people want homes, cabins or things in the mountains. How do we do that in a way that allows people to recreate and have that home and, have their grandchildren over in that cabin and have those memories while also doing the most minimal impact to the environment? And so how do we balance those? And so there were questions that were starting to come out of that work as well of, what's the amount of tree cover we need to have to keep these streams intact? What does that look like? So,
wow. Yeah. So, so seemingly a small and insignificant part of nature, and yet it's a real cog in the wheel. And I had no idea that salamanders were that in Appalachia, that was the hot spot worldwide, of biodiversity for salamanders. So it's that a really neat local sort of connection, but it's also global, which is something that connects to your later work. But yeah, the connection between the streams and the larger world, and low impact development, and trying to leave, if not no trace, less trace, little trace on the environment. And so all that, you can see how that develops into your later work, but really interesting there. Okay, so how you switched over to ocean planning? Why is this field important? Why does it matter?
Yeah, and I think we'll think about it as the old way and the traditional way that we have managed oceans is a very sort of species by species, federal agency or state agency by agency. And that old model, particularly in an era of, shifting fish stocks, when you all go to the beach and you talk to fishermen out on the water, they say, I have to go further offshore to catch this grouper, or I have to go further north, or there are people who've lived long enough to say, there's changes that are happening and they're not what it used to be. I'm sure people have all heard that. So this sort of older model of, Navy's got their thing that they're doing out in the ocean, and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which most people probably know as the people who give you weather and information, or there's buoys offshore that maybe you're looking at to see if you can go surf or, take your boat out. That's NOAA. And then you've got Army Corps, who does things like bridges and, maybe permits and things offshore. Coast Guard, who's dealing with the ports and maritime industry. And the old model was they were all just out doing their thing, collecting their data, making their decisions, and nobody was talking to one another. And when you think about technology coming on and the types of data that we can collect and the way that things are changing as rapidly, and frankly, the economies that are at the scale of which they're moving, we just need a more sort of integrated approach of the way we think about the ocean. We have to think about it more holistically. And so this was this idea, this concept is a way to try to start to move in that direction and get out of sort of the old model, and let's start sharing information. Let's start saying, where do we need more information? Let's even see what we have available or what the options are for data, and let's be smart about where we maybe put our resources to increase research in particular areas.
Yeah. And, just taking I guess even a broader view, why is the ocean so important to us? Why does it matter so much?
The stat that sort of blows my mind is 80% of the ocean is uncharacterized, unmapped, and unexplored. So we know more about the moon than we do about the ocean, which when you think about, particularly where you all live, and, most of you all are there because you're going to the ocean if you can every day, if you're not at work or you're not having to, if you can, that's why you live where you live. And the fact that you look out there and there's, across the globe, 80% of that we don't even understand. I think there's a recognition that we've got to get smarter about understanding that and what does that mean as a species, and what are the scientific, if you want to go sort of philosophical here, what are the scientific discoveries that we haven't even thought about? What are the cool species that you see on Blue Planet that we don't even know about because we haven't sort of invested that those resources that way. So at that level, I think that's just a fascinating stat to me. That's
incredible. so that's news to me, and I imagine a lot of folks out there. 80% of the ocean uncharacterized, unmapped, and unexplored, which is that kind of blows my mind.
Yeah.
And and I know in the old days, this may be incorrect, but correct me if I'm wrong. 70% of the Earth's mass is ocean, so is water. So that's a big part of our planet that we have. We really it's the great unknown. It's vast, and all that biodiversity and potential scientific discoveries, even medical discoveries for our own species.
Right.
I mean, it's just there's a huge unknown that's out there to be explored. So, and the fact, like you said, we like it. We like recreating, and you're certainly not against recreating at the ocean. That's not your goal, or in the Appalachian Mountains, as you mentioned, but balancing that and doing it as cleanly as possible and carefully, so that it lasts. That seems to be what you're hitting on. So this idea of not having agencies like the Navy or NOAA all divided off and dividing off, by species as well, trying to say this type of grouper by this agency, but instead sharing information, integrating it. That's the newer approach as opposed to the old approach, and that's IOM, or Integrated Ocean Management. Okay, so how can that help us if we go kind of narrow down from the global or overall, the big 80% of that uncharted ocean down to the South Carolina coast? What we missed a couple of big hurricanes here, in the Pawleys Island area lately, but we certainly have gotten hit with some coastal flooding, and it's been rather severe. How might IOM help with coastal flooding?
Yeah, it's a great question, and on it's something that a lot of communities on the East Coast are really grappling with. I think about it. I talked about it's the data and information to make good decisions, right? So part of it is saying, okay, what's the type of data that maybe the federal government's collecting? What's the state level data that South Carolina is collecting? And, integrated ocean management isn't just, let's just put together data and information and make a decision. It's building in the value system or the values of those who live and work on the ocean, right? And that means that we have to start defining, what is that, what's our value system? What do we want to invest in terms of coastal flooding, right? Where do we want to put resources? Where, maybe we're okay with this certain area flooding, but this other area, it really is a value to us. Or maybe, and then it's also thinking about, you all are in South Carolina, the Gullah Geechee Nation is there. How do we bring in some of that traditional knowledge of people who've lived there and have seen, change over time, and think about this more holistically and start to say, okay, we're limited resources. How do we start planning for that? We know floods are coming. We can maybe future cast a little bit of what storms are going to look like. How do we start making smart decisions about, where do we put beach renourishment, maybe where we don't? Some people in New England, for example, are talking about, and frankly in Miami as well, like managed retreats. How do we think about, do we build up certain homes, and like, what does that all look like? But those are all discussions the community sort of needs to have with the right data and information. And I think that to me is like a really fascinating part of integrated ocean management, is it's trying to not put the decision on, okay, I'm from the federal government and I'm coming to tell South Carolina what to do, right? It's sort of trying to create more of a regional or state conversation around these pieces. So that, to me, that's really fascinating. I will say the other thing about sea level rise and what's been fascinating is there's a recognition now at the federal level that agencies need to do a better job in communicating and coordinating with one another. So there's actually a bill that's about to be introduced in Congress that would sort of try to drive some of that. So people are starting to recognize that they need to take this approach to really start to have these conversations. Another sort of example of what some folks in New England and the New England and Mid-Atlantic states have started to coordinate a bit amongst themselves on sea level rise and this term sort of living shorelines. And so they do a lot of lessons learned in terms of information sharing, or, hey, we've done this, maybe this would be a good solution for you all. And, the South we're sort of known for just going for things on our own a little bit, they haven't sort of decided to do that yet, but that is, as these become more pressing challenges, that could be an avenue to think about is states collaborating more on restoration projects.
Wow. Yeah. And that is something, down south, we do tend to, we kind of dig in, and we tend to not want to, especially if it's perceived as a federal agency, we don't, keep the feds out, keep the government out, of our business. We're going to decide. We like that self-determination. And yet, this seems like an issue that these sea level rise, coastal flooding doesn't respect state boundaries or regional boundaries. It's going to, so it is something that you're going to have a coordinated approach to it, it looks like. But it sounds like what you do is, I like that emphasis on values and value system, that you're not just coming in and trying to impose decisions from outside or in that way, but you're giving the information to the state or even local communities and allowing them to make better informed decisions. They're certainly part of the process, those communities, and taking into account their value systems. So what they're getting out of those shorelines, out of the ocean, is a crucial part of that decision. It's fishing industry or shrimping industry, or it's not recreation is part of it. It's not just keeping. Those are parts of the conversation. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great example of that is, particularly so New England, Rhode Island, for example, they're starting to think about where they're building offshore wind in some of the New England states. That new use is happening offshore because there's a recognition that those states want renewable energy, and they've sort of collectively decided that. But Rhode Island is a huge sailing community, right? Most of the coastal towns are a huge sailing. So how do we make, one of the calculations when they were thinking about where to put wind was, how do we make sure we can still have these sailing races that we've had for forever and really as a value to why people want to live here? And how do we make sure that our fishermen can have the areas they need to fish? And it's about sort of trying to reconcile and do compatible uses. And not everyone is going to be happy with every decision all the time, but it's at least we're trying to get to an attempt to say, all right, what's all out here, and how can we sort of co-manage this in a thoughtful way? And when you look at South Carolina, maybe sailing is not the thing that people care about as much, but we want to be able to take our boat out. We want to be able to go recreational fishing. We want to be able to surf. And so how do you build that into a management system that works for the values of the people that live there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned the even something cultural values and cultural heritage, like the Gullah, Gullah in Geechee, Gullah in South Carolina, Geechee in Georgia, that heritage and kind of calling that into, or taking that into account, calling attention to that in decisions as well. And other constituencies as well could be part of that conversation. So even on those other levels, cultural levels, you're inviting people into the conversation. So it seems to make sense, although it sounds like maybe down south there's more resistance, at least initially, than in some other areas.
Yeah, and I think there's got to be sort of a driver, right? There's got to be something, a reason. It's hard for us as humans to sort of plan on the future, right? We're sort of in reaction mode, and I think we're slowly starting to move in the direction of, okay, we need to sort of plan for the future and what that means. But we'll get there. It's just it takes a little time, and federal agency is it's a new way of doing things and approaching things, and that takes time for people to see the value in that approach. And in the 10 years that I've done this, I've seen such a shift in sort of the way we approach these things. So it's all positive. It's all moving sort of in the right direction. It's just takes time.
And another issue like ocean pollution, which again knows no boundaries or doesn't, it flows over state boundaries and regional boundaries, national boundaries. But that's something that I think, it seems like folks can get behind that. Nobody wants polluted. It ruins the tourist industry in a place, Georgetown County is so driven by our tourist economy that we want a clean ocean.
Right.
So how might this IOM connect with better solving or at least offering a better situation in terms of ocean pollution?
Yeah, so we actually, Ocean Conservancy has a huge plastic pollution program, and we run and have for over 30 years the International Coastal Cleanup. And, it's been sort of volunteer driven. People go and collect trash on their beach. And what has evolved over the years is we now do a citizen science component of that, where people are collecting. You essentially have an app, and you're collecting trash on your beach, and you add that to the app, and then we can start to get a good picture of at least where trash is washing up on the beach, recognizing that there's a lot that's still in the ocean, but we can start to see where hot spots are. And even that, that sort of citizen driven information starts to get built into a system where you can start to make really good decisions about, you overlay ocean currents, and you start to sort of add all the sort of scientific components that you think about, and you can start to get a good picture of where particular areas are that we need to, invest in. And maybe that looks different for different places, right? I think a huge ethos, at least for me and for Ocean Conservancy, is that, places are all different, right? There's not, what works for South Carolina might not work for California, and the problems and challenges are unique, and that's what makes these hard. And if these were easy things to solve, we would have solved them by now. So I think that information, and having that information you start to be able to use that in unique ways. So maybe if there were just a couple more trash receptacles at the public beach, then we wouldn't have this problem, right? Maybe it's a simple solution like that, or maybe it's, it's from flooding upstream that is near where tires are being stored, and really that's where we're seeing the issue. And if we could just, talk to the guy who's storing his tires for his business and talk about that, like, how could we address some of those things? That's a really simple example, but you get the point. It's it's sort of, when you have information, you're empowered to start to make better decisions. And I think that theme at least fits into this sort of integrated ocean management approach. But then when you start to think more globally, it's not just the US that's interested in sort of this approach to management. Europe has done a ton of these. Norway is a leader in this work. So you could see a scenario where if Canada is planning their ocean and Mexico's planned their ocean, we could start to have sort of cross, national conversations about pollution, about some of these challenges, because we're all coming with sort of a complete picture. That's sort of the local way out to the, more global context.
Good. And what was that app?
Oh, it's Clean Swell. I'm happy to share it with you. Clean Swell is the app.
Okay.
And if you Google International Coastal Cleanup, it's just a cool little way to feel like I'm contributing to this, all this huge data set, and it's neat. Yeah.
Well, good. Yeah. Clean Swell. So next time, I'm sure we have a lot of folks out there who help with beach sweeps, and either collectively or some, I know some do it on their own. Bob Willie and his wife Carol, I've seen out on the beach just on their own. He runs our FOGO, our Friends of the Georgetown Library, and they're just out there picking up any trash they see, just because they're good citizens. But if they use the Clean Swell app, they can help with the larger picture, the local connecting with the global. So that's terrific, a terrific. And to go back to something you said towards the beginning, you started out as an academic, and and I know your other half is an academic, but and a great one, Hunter Hoskins, good soul. And I was an academic and still, I guess I still am. I'm a recovering academic. But there's something terrific about being, what you said about being public facing, being actionable. You said, you're doing things that are actionable. You're helping create policy or empowering people to do that. So it's not just all about theory or, it's not all academic. It is putting things into action, and even those small ways can have much larger impacts.
Right. Yeah, and I guess I want to go back to that, like, doing policy piece, because I feel like, when I was 10 years ago, when I was an academic and I thought I'm going to go to DC and do policy, I thought I knew what that meant. And I quickly realized that I had no idea, and that it, a lot of it is about, there are Hill staffers whose job it is to write law, to do, and if you look at any given Hill office, they may have a staffer whose portfolio is, if you're lucky, it's environment. If it's a House office, they may be environment, energy, healthcare. Like, they have a lot to cover. And so nonprofits like ours, who are science-based, who know a lot in the community in terms of, the different people who use the ocean, whether it's the maritime industry or the fishing industry or, you name it. Part of what we try to do is work with those staffers to say, hey, there's this great research that's out there, or, we continue to hear from the maritime industry that this is really a problem. Maybe you should think about X as you draft this next bill. And so we try to be not only I'm going to come to your office and tell you what I think you should do, but a resource and a helpful colleague. And I think that's really how you start to change policy and help shape that. And to me, that's a really effective model, and it's been really a highlight to be able to sort of be be sort of seen as an expert or a colleague to those staff who, frankly, are really overwhelmed. So are happy to have, great resources and flags of who they should talk with. That to me has been a really fun part of translating that science into action.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I assume it's messier, it's and tougher, and it's not as maybe as glorious as it as you were initially thinking, but it's also it's more real. You are getting things done in that through collaboration,
Right.
which is, and that's the idea of IOM as well, is to collaborate with outwardly with agencies, with communities on down the line. So it seems to be working. Do you have some interesting stories about working with various folks in Washington?
Interesting stories. Yeah, I guess maybe I'll just sort of give you a broad story of, I didn't really realize this until I got here, but the idea of people being policy, people say that a lot, people are policy. And what's been really fascinating, to work under the Obama administration and then the Trump administration and now through the Biden administration, is that there are, experts in ocean policy who have, are under all of those different administrations, right? Whose job it is to serve at the pleasure of the president and to help advance the things they know need to advance, but in the frame, if you will, of a given administration. So if you look at sort of the ocean policy under Obama, the frame was very much, healthy ecosystems and vibrant coastal communities, and it had more of sort of a science biodiversity ethos sort of underpinning it. When you look at the Trump ocean policy, it was very much national security, commerce, right? So just a different value system, and I know there are a lot of politics around all these other pieces, but I'm sticking just to the ocean piece. There were different sort of high level frames, but when you started to look at the policy itself, like the actual things in that, they really weren't that different. And to me, that's been fascinating when you think about the rhetoric of, what we hear on the media or what we hear every day, only for that slice of sort of ocean pieces. Like when you start to really get into it, yes, there were some things that people would want different in each, but some of those bare structures were fairly similar. And to me, that's been interesting. And I think that is part of the people or policy component. It's that interesting sort of way to how do you still achieve what you want to achieve, but framing in different ways to sort of meet various agendas.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, this may be the penultimate question. Get that word in. If you could kind of wave a magic wand, or what would an ideal sustainable ocean economy look like for, if we said for this area, for Pawleys Island? Is that too big a question, or?
I mean, I'm happy to go there. I
give
think,
it a shot. Yeah,
I'll give it a shot. And I think with the caveat that, the people of Pawleys Island should, in theory, define that, because that's sort of the way this works. But, my vision is, what are the values that people have of Pawleys, right? We know that there's, people love to ride bikes, they love to surf, they love to, they like the idea of fresh fish coming, for them to eat every day. And, how do we have conversations with the Gullah Nation to say, what are the things that you need for your traditional spiritual uses, and sort of having that conversation of, what are all the components people are interested in, and how do we make sure that, you know, fishing can still exist, that our grandkids can still benefit from that, that folks can go surfing, that, you know, people can play and swim in a clean ocean. How do we preserve that component of polys? So, you know, when you think about development, and I know that's probably a touchy subject for people, but like, how do we do that in a way that makes sense and kind of preserves that livelihood and that reason why people love to come there? And you know, another thing I think about is how do we make sure that people have access to the beach, right? It's one thing for us that have cars or you know, the resources to come to the beach. How do we make sure that we're building in an option for people who, you know, maybe public transportation is their option, or maybe they need, you know, what does that look like? And are we making sure that, you know, the beach isn't, you know, and the ocean just isn't for a few? You know, when I think about sort of a utopian vision of that, it's, you know, you often hear school kids who live near the ocean who've never been. And to me, that's just such a shame. And like, how do we solve that and let people have that artistic, spiritual, you name it, connection? And, you know, I think about that when I come to the beach is parking spaces are limited. How do people, you know, how do people that don't have that or who aren't getting up super early, like, how do they have that option? And I think building that in is important. And then, you know, I think when you talk to fishermen, it's a hard, particularly commercial fisheries, it's a hard job. It's hard work. And, you know, I know there are conversations around feeling like we need to get another, you know, a younger generation invested and engaged in that. Like, do we need to start having training programs, or like, what does that look like? And how do we start having those conversations and provide opportunities or unique opportunities for people in the fishery sector? So maybe that's aquaculture, you know, maybe oyster restoration is a way that someone could have a real business, right, where they could fish offshore for some things and also have you know, maintain an aquaculture farm. Like, how do we have those conversations?
Yeah. Well, that was a terrific shot. You were right on target with the shot, and with the caveat that, you know, bringing in the members of the local community to get their view of the values and value systems. But you did a pretty good job, I think, of representing those. And I love what you said too. It's you know, it's about fishing, recreational and commercial. It's about other forms of recreation at the beach, you know, and of course about the science, the biodiversity, but we also get that spiritual and aesthetic appreciation from the ocean that just, you know, a lot of us get that, and that's something that we need maybe to spread that access more fully, democratize that instead of shutting it off. But so all really interesting things there. As the ultimate question here, what would you is there one thing you can tell us to do to make our shoreline cleaner? We got the Clean Swell app that we can sign up for, but anything else you can tell us that we can do, you know, just right now, a thing or two that we can do to kind of carry with us today to make our shoreline here a little bit better?
I would say recognize the awesome privilege it is to live on polys and sort of value that. You know, I work in the federal government and the federal agencies, so I always say, you know, if you're talking to your congressperson, funding for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is always a severely underfunded agency, and so, if you're inclined to sort of make that request, science and information and weather are all great things and important. I think too, the whole support your local fishermen, and I think you all are probably doing that a little better than most, but we often hear of fishermen struggling this especially with the pandemic and COVID and restaurants shutting down, and so supporting sort of local fishermen, I think is really important when you think about coastal communities and the healthy vibrance of coastal communities. And then of course picking up trash and those types of things too. But
yeah. All right, that was terrific stuff. Advice, words of wisdom to end on there. Things we can do, because we do have a wonderful place here. We live in paradise, so we need to keep it as pristine as we can, and really to appreciate that, and we don't want to ruin paradise here.
Right.
They're all good things, and clean it up. So thank you so much, Amy Trice from the Ocean Conservancy, with us talking about integrated ocean management and what we can do to make this place even better down here. And hopefully we'll see you and maybe Hunter again sometime down here in person. I hope when things are getting better. We're easing up with the travel, but hopefully we'll see you down here you can investigate in person what we can do in our local community here at Pawleys Island.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks everyone for joining. And yeah, I'll be coming to surf hopefully sooner rather than later. So look forward to it. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being with us here today, and bringing this to a great a fit conclusion. Our FOWL First Thursday series for 2020 and 2021, and we thank y'all for being with us, viewers. And this will be uploaded up on our YouTube channel as well, if you didn't catch it on the Facebook Live right now. So we're looking forward to starting back up again in September. We'll have Robert Moss, a food expert, talking about low country barbecue, the tradition of low country barbecue, and we know we have some great ones right here in Georgetown County. So he'll give us a slice of Georgetown County barbecue as well. So looking forward to that. In the meantime, have a wonderful day and a wonderful summer, and enjoy that beach carefully and cleanly. And so thank y'all for being here, and thank you again, Amy.